Alice 34F, and if there's one thing I dread every year, it's Thanksgiving with my family. This year, things hit a whole new level of dysfunction, and I honestly don't know if I'm the problem or if they are. Buckle up, this one's a ride. Let me start with some context. I'm a freelance graphic designer. It's a career I love, even if it doesn't come with a steady paycheck or a fancy office. My husband, Mark 37M, is supportive, but my family doesn't see it that way. Every time I show up at these gatherings, they act like I'm some unemployed slacker. To make things worse, I don't eat meat, which to my mom and dad is practically a declaration of war. Oh, and they think I'm not involved enough with my kids because Mark and I split parenting duties pretty evenly. It's like I can't win. Thanksgiving at my parents' house is a tradition that goes back as long as I can remember. The food, the same decorations, and the same drama. It's all part of the deal. My mom, Cheryl, rules the kitchen like a general preparing for battle, barking orders at everyone while simultaneously complaining that no one helps her. Dad sits in his recliner, pretending to watch football but really just grumbling about the state of the world. My younger brother, Ethan, loves to stir the pot, and my older sister, Laura, takes passive aggressiveness to Olympic levels. This year started like every other. Mark and I packed up the kids, Maya, who's 7, and Dylan, who's 5, and drove the 2 hours to my parents' house. I was already bracing myself for the comments. The moment I walked in, my mom gave me a once-over and said, "You look tired, honey. Have you been working too hard or just not sleeping?" Right on cue, Ethan chimed in with, "Oh, she's probably just stressed about her art projects or whatever she's calling it these days." I tried to shrug it off. I really did. But when Laura showed up half an hour later with her husband, Greg, and their perfect children in tow, the comparisons began. Laura has a real job in finance, Greg is a lawyer, and their kids are apparently angels sent from above. "Did you hear that Emily got accepted into the gifted program?" Laura asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And Ben is starting piano lessons. He's so talented." Meanwhile, my mom made a big show of asking Maya if she was doing okay in school, like she expected my kids to be struggling. The real trouble started at dinner. Mom had roasted a turkey the size of a small car, and the table was groaning under the weight of all the sides. She plopped a heaping pile of mashed potatoes onto my plate before I could say anything, and when I reminded her that I don't eat meat or dishes made with chicken stock, she sighed dramatically. "I don't know why you have to make things so difficult, Alice," she said. "It's Thanksgiving. Can't you just enjoy the meal like everyone else?" Mark tried to come to my defense, pointing out that I brought my own dish to share so I wouldn't be a burden. That only made things worse. "Oh, so now we're not good enough cooks for you?" Mom snapped. Ethan, of course, couldn't resist jumping in. "You know, Alice, you used to love Mom's cooking. What happened? Did your artsy friends turn you into one of those kale-eating hipsters?" I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I held it together for the kids. Or at least I tried to. Then Laura decided to weigh in on my parenting. "It must be nice to have so much me time while Mark does all the work," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I don't know how you manage to juggle everything with your, what do you call it? Freelancing." That was the last straw. I slammed my fork down and said, "You know what, Laura? At least I'm happy with my life. I don't need to put other people down to feel good about myself." The room went silent. Even Ethan looked shocked. Mom quickly tried to smooth things over, but the damage was done. The rest of the meal was unbearably awkward, and as soon as dessert was served, Mark and I packed up the kids and left. On the drive home, I couldn't stop replaying the night in my head. Maybe I overreacted, but I'm so tired of being treated like a failure just because my life doesn't look like theirs. Mark said he was proud of me for standing up for myself, but I can't help wondering if I made things worse. Should I have just kept quiet and let their comments roll off my back? Or was I right to finally call them out? I don't know, Reddit. All I know is Thanksgiving will never be the same. Thanksgiving came around again this year, and I swear it felt like a repeat of the last 12. Same house, same food, same people, and of course the same conflicts. It's like my family has a script they dust off every year. One where I'm cast as the perpetual disappointment. I told myself this time would be different. I'd go in, smile, nod, and let their barbs slide off me like water off a duck's back. It didn't work. We showed up at my parents' house mid-afternoon. Mom greeted me with her usual sharp once-over, pausing just long enough on my outfit to let me know she didn't approve. Oh, she said. You're wearing that? I thought you might have something a little dressier. I bit my tongue and smiled, telling myself it wasn't worth it. Mark gave me a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder, and we herded the kids inside. Things unraveled quickly. Before we even sat down for dinner, Ethan cornered me with his annual jabs about how weird my career is. So, Alice, he said, leaning against the counter like he'd been practicing his smugness in the mirror. How's the graphic artistry going? Or are we calling it freelancing again this year? He laughed at his own joke while I stared at him, trying not to let my frustration show. Dinner was worse. I barely had time to sit down before my mom started nitpicking. Alice, are you sure you don't want turkey? I mean, it's tradition. Don't you miss it? And those what do you call them plant things aren't really food, you know? Laura chimed in, reminding everyone how hard it must be for Mark to put up with my quirky habits. He's such a saint, she said, smiling at him like she was awarding him a medal. For a while I just stared at my plate, forcing myself to focus on the kids or the decorations or anything other than their voices. But when Laura started in on my parenting again, I snapped. So, Alice, how do you even find time for the kids with all your creative projects? She said, tilting her head like she was genuinely curious. It must be so hard. I mean, not everyone can handle what I do, balancing work, a family, and still making time to volunteer. I took a deep breath, but the words just came out. You know what, Laura? Maybe if you didn't spend so much time bragging, you'd actually hear your kids when they talk to you. I barely recognized my own voice, low, cold, and shaking with anger. The silence was deafening. Mom looked horrified. Ethan's smirk vanished. Even Mark seemed a little stunned. For a split second I thought maybe I'd crossed the line. But then Laura, with her perfect posture and her practiced condescension, said, Well, it's not my fault you're jealous, Alice. Maybe if you'd made better choices, you wouldn't be so bitter. That was it. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor, grabbed my coat and walked out without another word. Mark called after me, but I was already halfway down the driveway. The cold air felt like a slap in the face, but I welcomed it. I needed to breathe. I got in the car, turned the ignition and pulled out of the driveway, not caring where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there another second. My phone started buzzing before I even hit the main road. Text calls, my mom, Ethan, even Laura. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My chest felt like it was going to explode, and I needed to calm down before I said something I couldn't take back. 5 miles out, Mark called. I almost didn't pick up, but then I thought about the kids and how confused they must be. Alice, he said, his voice calm but firm, are you okay? The kids are asking where you went. I didn't know what to say. Was I okay? Not really. But I wasn't going to cry on the phone. I needed to get out of there, I said finally. I couldn't do it anymore, Mark. I'm sorry. He sighed. I get it. I do. But you can't just leave like that without telling anyone. The kids. I'll explain it to them, I interrupted. I'll make it right. But I couldn't stay there and let them tear me down again. Not this time. Mark was quiet for a moment, then said, Come home when you're ready. I'll cover for you. I hung up and kept driving, my mind racing. I felt a strange mix of guilt and relief, like I'd finally taken control of something but wasn't sure what it was. For the first time in years I wasn't sitting at that table, pretending to be okay while my family tore me apart. I had no idea what would happen next, but for now it felt good just to be free. The fallout from Thanksgiving was as dramatic as I'd expected, maybe even more so. The text came in waves, starting with my mom. Alice, how could you do this to the family? Do you know how embarrassing it was to have you storm out like that? What were the neighbors going to think? You're an adult, act like one. I didn't respond. Next came Lucas, my younger brother, who never missed an opportunity to take a swipe at me. Classic Alice. Always has to make it about her. You think you're better than us because you're too good for Thanksgiving now? Guess what, you're not. Blocked. Amanda wasn't far behind. Her message was just as cutting, but with an extra dose of her signature fake concern. I don't know what's going on with you, Alice, but I hope you get some help. This family isn't perfect, but we've always been there for you. Maybe if you weren't so self-centered, you'd see that. Blocked. By the end of the weekend, I'd blocked everyone but my dad and my cousin Andrew. Dad wasn't much of a talker, But he sent a single message that made me pause. I don't agree with how you left, but I get why you did. Call me if you want to talk. And Andrew's sweet, unproblematic Andrew called me later that night to check in. You okay, cuz? He asked. You looked ready to explode at dinner. I don't blame you for leaving, but I wanted to make sure you're good. For the first time since I'd walked out, I felt like someone actually cared about how I was doing. I told him the truth, that I was exhausted and angry, and a little scared about what would happen next. They'll get over it, he said. Or they won't. Either way, you've got me and Uncle Robert in your corner. That helped more than I could say, but the anxiety still lingered. I spent the next few days replaying the night in my head, wondering if I'd gone too far. Part of me wanted to apologize just to keep the peace, but every time I thought about their comments, the constant jabs, the endless criticism, I felt my blood boil all over again. I decided to bring it up in my next therapy session. My therapist, Dr. Patel, listened patiently as I vented about the dinner and the aftermath. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair and said, "It sounds like you've been prioritizing their feelings over your own for a long time. Leaving was a boundary, a messy one, maybe, but a boundary nonetheless." I nodded, but I still felt conflicted. They're family, though. Isn't it my job to keep trying? Dr. Patel tilted her head, considering me. What happens when you try? Do they listen? Do they change their behavior? No, I admitted. They double down. They make me feel like I'm the problem. And how does that affect you? She asked. I didn't have to think about it. It makes me feel small, like nothing I do will ever be good enough for them. Dr. Patel gave me a small smile. So, why keep putting yourself in that position? Setting boundaries isn't about punishing them. It's about protecting yourself. You can love your family and still decide not to let them hurt you. That was the moment it clicked. I'd spent years walking on eggshells, trying to prove myself to people who had no intention of seeing me for who I was. Leaving dinner wasn't a meltdown or a failure. It was me finally saying, enough. I decided to keep my boundaries firm. Blocking their numbers felt extreme, but it also felt like breathing fresh air for the first time in years. Without their constant negativity in my inbox, I could think more clearly. Mark was supportive, though he reminded me to take it one step at a time. Just because you're setting boundaries doesn't mean you have to burn every bridge, he said. Maybe someday they'll come around, but until then, focus on what makes you happy. I wasn't sure if they'd ever come around, but for the first time I didn't care. I had Mark, the kids, Andrew, and Dad. That was enough for now. My world didn't have to revolve around people who couldn't accept me for who I was. Thanksgiving might have been a disaster, but it taught me something I should have learned a long time ago. I deserve better, even from family. The drama didn't end when I blocked them. If anything, it escalated. My family, true to form, found new ways to make their displeasure known. The first salvo came from Amanda. I was scrolling through Instagram one night, trying to unwind after a long day, when I saw it. A photo of my mom sitting at the dining room table, her face buried in her hands, with the caption, "Some people don't appreciate family until it's too late." My stomach dropped. It was a blatant dig at me, and the comments were exactly what you'd expect. Amanda's friends chimed in with sympathy, talking about how hard it must be to deal with someone so selfish. Even a few extended family members joined the fray, offering their support for my mom, and subtly implying that I was the villain. It stung, but I didn't take the bait. Over the next few weeks, similar posts started popping up. Amanda posted a photo of the kids playing board games with their grandparents, captioned, "Family is everything. Some people should try it." Lucas wasn't as direct. His style was more passive-aggressive. But he shared a meme about entitled millennials who think the world revolves around them, that felt pointed enough to land. The hardest part was seeing my mom participate. She didn't post much, but when someone commented on Amanda's photo saying, "You've done so much for your family, Cheryl. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you," she replied. "It's heartbreaking. All I ever wanted was for my children to be close." I wanted to scream. The guilt was like a weight pressing down on my chest, but I kept reminding myself what Dr. Patel had said. You can't control how they react to your boundaries. All you can control is how you respond. So I didn't respond. Instead, I threw myself into work and leaned on the people who actually supported me. Mark was a rock through all of it, reminding me that I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Andrew checked in regularly, offering his usual mix of humor and reassurance. "If they want to paint you as the villain, let them," he said. "It's not like they're handing out Oscars for best fake victim performance." I also started reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen much of in the chaos of the last few years. I hadn't realized how much I'd neglected my relationships outside of family, but once I started reaching out, the response was overwhelming. People were happy to see me, happy to catch up. One night, over drinks with my best friend Sophie, I finally let it all out. "I feel like I'm losing my family," I said, tears threatening to spill over. "And as much as I hate how they treat me, it still hurts." Sophie nodded, her expression soft but firm. "Of course it hurts. They're your family. They're supposed to love you unconditionally. But that doesn't mean you have to keep letting them hurt you. Love isn't supposed to feel like this." Her words stuck with me. I started to focus more on my career too, taking on bigger projects and putting myself out there in ways I hadn't before. For years I'd been holding back, afraid of failing or being judged. But now, without the constant negativity from my family, I felt freer. My clients noticed too. I landed a few new contracts that paid better than anything I'd done before. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of what I was building. The more I focused on my own life, the less power my family's antics seemed to have over me. Their posts and rumors hurt, sure, but they didn't define me. I had people who saw me for who I was, who didn't need me to fit into some narrow idea of what a good daughter or a successful person was supposed to be. I wasn't sure what the future held for my relationship with my family, but for now I was okay with the distance. Let them spread their rumors, let them play their games. I wasn't going to play along anymore. 2 months passed, and in that time I had gotten used to the quiet. Without the constant barrage of guilt and judgment, my life had started to feel lighter. I was spending more time with Mark and the kids, deepening friendships, and finally feeling like I was living on my own terms. The wounds my family had inflicted still stung, but they were beginning to scab over. Then one afternoon I got the letter. It arrived in a pale blue envelope with my name written in my mom's perfect cursive. For a moment I debated throwing it straight in the trash, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it carefully like it might explode. The letter was short but surprisingly heartfelt. "Alice, we've been thinking a lot about what happened and how we've treated you over the years. We realize now that we've been unfair and unkind. You didn't deserve that. We miss you and want to make things right. If you're willing, we'd like to meet and talk. No pressure, no expectations, just a chance to listen and apologize properly. Love, Mom, Dad, Amanda, Lucas." I read it 3 times before I could process it. My first instinct was suspicion. Felt too sudden, too easy. Part of me wanted to believe they'd had a genuine change of heart, but another part of me couldn't shake the fear that this was just another attempt to manipulate me. I showed the letter to Mark that evening. He read it, then handed it back with a shrug. "It sounds like they're trying," he said. "But it's up to you whether you want to give them the chance." I brought it up with Dr. Patel in my next session. She encouraged me to think about what I needed to feel safe if I decided to meet with them. "You've set boundaries and they seem to be respecting them so far," she said. "But you're allowed to have conditions. Reconciliation doesn't mean throwing your boundaries away." So I wrote back. My letter was brief and to the point. "I appreciate the apology and your willingness to talk. I'm open to meeting, but only under certain conditions. I'd like us to meet in a neutral location, and I'd feel more comfortable with a mediator present to ensure we stay focused and respectful. If this works for you, let me know." They agreed almost immediately. We set a date to meet at a coffee shop about 10 miles from my house, and I arranged for Dr. Patel to act as the mediator. The day of the meeting, my nerves were shot. Mark reassured me as I got ready, reminding me that I was in control. "You're not walking into an ambush," he said. "You've set the terms. You can leave if you need to." I arrived a few minutes early, and Dr. Patel was already there. She gave me a warm smile and a quick pep talk before the rest of my family arrived. Mom and Dad came in first, looking nervous but hopeful. Amanda and Lucas followed, glancing around like they expected me to bolt at any second. We exchanged awkward hellos and sat down. For a moment no one spoke. Then Dr. Patel gently guided us into the conversation. "We're here to listen to Alice," she began, "and to create a space where everyone can speak honestly without fear of judgment or interruption." To my surprise, they actually listened. Mom apologized first, tears streaming down her face as she admitted how much her behavior had hurt me. "I thought I was helping by pushing you, but I see now that I was just tearing you down." "I'm so sorry, Alice." Dad followed, his voice gruff but sincere. "I didn't realize how much I'd been taking you for granted. I should have been more supportive, but I wasn't." "That's on me." Amanda and Lucas were quieter, but they both apologized too. Amanda admitted that her competitiveness had blinded her to how much I was struggling, and Lucas said he regretted his constant teasing. It wasn't perfect, but it felt genuine. I told them how their comments and behavior had made me feel over the years, like I was never good enough, like I was an outsider in my own family. They listened without interrupting, which was a small miracle in itself. By the end of the meeting, I didn't feel like all our problems were magically solved, but it was a start. I told them I wasn't ready to jump back into family gatherings just yet, but I'd be open to more conversations like this one. They agreed to take things slow and to respect my boundaries moving forward. Walking out of that coffee shop, I felt a cautious sense of hope. Rebuilding our relationship would take time, but for the first time in years, I felt like it might actually be possible. A few weeks after our coffee shop meeting, we had our first family therapy session. I wasn't sure what to expect. Honestly, part of me was bracing for the whole thing to backfire, for someone to lash out or turn it into another blame game. But I agreed because for the first time they seemed willing to actually try. We met at the therapist's office, a neutral space where no one could dominate the conversation. Dr. Patel wasn't running the session this time. Instead, we worked with a family therapist named Dr. Harris, a calm, no-nonsense woman who made it clear from the start that this was a space for constructive dialogue, not finger-pointing or defensiveness. We began with a moment of silence, which immediately felt awkward. I looked at my mom, Diana, who was nervously twisting her wedding ring, and then at Dad, Robert, who seemed uncharacteristically subdued. Amanda and Lucas sat on the opposite side of the room, their expressions guarded. Dr. Harris broke the silence. "This session is an opportunity to address past hurts and begin rebuilding trust. We're here to listen and to take accountability where it's needed. Alice, since you've taken the brunt of the family's criticism in the past, I'd like to start by giving you the floor." I hesitated. Even with a mediator, I wasn't sure if I could trust them to hear me out. But I reminded myself why I was there. I took a deep breath and started talking. "I've spent so many years feeling like I don't belong in this family," I said, my voice trembling. "No matter what I do, it feels like it's never good enough. You criticize my career, my parenting, my choices, even my diet. It's exhausting. And the worst part is I've told you how it makes me feel, but you've never taken it seriously. I've felt invisible, like I only exist so you can point out everything you think I'm doing wrong." The room was quiet for a long time. Then, to my surprise, my mom spoke up first. "You're right," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I've put so much pressure on you, on all of you really, but especially you, Alice. I thought I was doing what a good mother should, pushing you to be your best. But I see now that it wasn't fair. I wasn't encouraging you, I was trying to control you. And I'm sorry. I was wrong." Tears welled up in my eyes. I'd never heard her admit to being wrong before, let alone apologize. Dad cleared his throat, his expression a mix of guilt and shame. "I've got no excuse for how I've handled things," he said. "I thought ignoring the conflicts would make them go away, but all it did was make things worse. I was so worried about keeping the peace that I let you carry the weight of the family's dysfunction, Alice. I should have done more to protect you, and I'm sorry for that." Lucas, who'd been fidgeting uncomfortably, finally spoke up. "I took you for granted," he admitted. "You were always the one holding things together. Helping Mom. Putting up with my jokes, keeping the family from falling apart. I treated you like you owed it to us, and that wasn't fair. I'm sorry for being such a jerk." Amanda, usually so composed and self-assured, looked down at her hands as she spoke. "I've been awful to you, Alice. I've spent so much time comparing myself to you, trying to feel superior, that I didn't stop to think about how it made you feel. And the stuff I posted on social media? That was cruel. I was lashing out because I felt guilty, and instead of owning up to it, I made you the scapegoat.
I'm sorry.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For the first time in over a decade, my family was actually taking responsibility for their actions without trying to deflect or make excuses. Dr. Harris guided the session gently, making sure everyone had a chance to speak and reflect. When it came back around to me, I struggled to put my feelings into words. I've been waiting for this for so long, I said finally. I just wanted to be heard, to be treated like I mattered. Hearing you all acknowledge what's happened, it means more than I can say. But this is just the beginning. I'm willing to try to rebuild these relationships, but it's going to take time. And I need you to respect my boundaries as we move forward. They all nodded, and for the first time I felt like they actually meant it. The session ended on a hopeful note. As we walked out of the office, my mom hugged me. A real genuine hug, not the obligatory kind she'd given me in the past. Thank you for giving us this chance, she said. Driving home, I felt an unfamiliar mix of emotions. Relief, hope, and maybe even a little bit of peace. I knew there was still a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like reconciliation wasn't just a pipe dream. It was a possibility. After that family therapy session, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready to jump back into the deep end with my family. The apologies were a start, but years of hurt don't just vanish overnight. I decided to maintain limited contact with them, under one very clear condition. We'd continue therapy sessions. If they wanted to repair our relationship, it would take consistent effort, not just a one-time apology. To my surprise, they agreed. We set up monthly sessions, and while they were often uncomfortable and messy, I could see progress. Mom started catching herself before making passive-aggressive comments. Lucas actually apologized to me in real time when he slipped up, which was a minor miracle. Amanda toned down her competitive streak, and Dad made an effort to be more present in the conversations. Still, I knew I couldn't let their issues consume my life again. For the first time in years, I had the space to focus on me. I signed up for a cooking class at a small local school. I'd always loved experimenting in the kitchen, but I'd never taken the time to really learn. Every Tuesday evening, I'd tie on my apron and dive into a world of sauces, spices, and techniques I'd never tried before. It became my favorite night of the week, a little bubble of joy where the stresses of life couldn't touch me. I also started drawing again. For years, my graphic design work had taken precedence, leaving my personal art to gather dust. But now, with no one breathing down my neck about real jobs or serious responsibilities, I picked up my sketchbook and rediscovered how much I loved creating for the sake of creating. I'd spend quiet afternoons lost in my own world, and it felt like coming home to a part of myself I'd forgotten. My social circle expanded, too. Between reconnecting with old friends and meeting new ones through classes and networking events, I found myself surrounded by people who genuinely supported and appreciated me. They didn't care how much money I made or whether my kids were in a gifted program, they just liked me. It was refreshing and deeply affirming. Then there was work. With all the personal growth I'd been doing, my confidence had skyrocketed, and it showed in my projects. Clients were thrilled with the designs I delivered, and word of mouth brought in more business than I'd ever had before. One day, I got an email from a major marketing firm I'd been freelancing for, asking if I'd consider taking on a lead designer role. The offer floored me. It wasn't just about the money or the prestige, though both were undeniably appealing. It was about what the promotion symbolized. After years of feeling undervalued and dismissed, here was undeniable proof that I was capable, talented, and worth investing in. I accepted the job and celebrated with Mark and the kids that night. Maya and Dylan made me a best mom ever card, and Mark cooked dinner, a rare treat since I usually took charge in the kitchen. As we sat together laughing and eating, I felt a sense of contentment I hadn't felt in years. I'm not going to lie and say everything is perfect now. My relationship with my family is still a work in progress, and some days are harder than others. But I've learned to set boundaries, prioritize my own well-being, and surround myself with people who uplift me instead of tearing me down. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm living my life on my terms. And honestly, feels pretty damn good.